7 o'clock and 35 seconds. Roll call, please.
Okay. Director Slater-Carter,
Present.
Director Clark is here for Director Warren.
Correct.
Director Penrose, not here. Director Blanchard.
Here?
And Director Boyd.
Yes.
And Director Reddick is not here.
Okay. Public comment, oral communication. And I would request that you fill out a slip so that, for the minutes, after you
You can do
finish
it after,
talking,
yeah.
it's not like
Not a problem.
required, but it makes sure your name is spelled correctly.
Absolutely. Good evening. My name is Dan Barros, and I'm here on behalf of the city of Half Moon Bay. As the board may know, the representatives from Half Moon Bay wanted to attend this meeting. However, 3 council members are out of town and 2 have conflicts, and thus we're not able to have anyone from Half Moon Bay attend this meeting other than myself and our deputy city manager, Matthew Chittister. It is the city's understanding that the attorneys for the 4 agencies have reached agreement as to the terms of the stipulation and order, and that in fact, all that is left is the logistics of having the documents signed. As per the stipulation and order, we look forward to Sam billing the city, and the city will issue payment as promptly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comment? Seeing none, we will move into closed session. We will then convene an open session for another public comment, and then move to the agenda items. I don't see any public comment. Let's just call it reconvene in open session. We have nothing to report from closed session, and there is no consent agenda because this is a special meeting. So we will do the old business, adopt a resolution and approve and adopting the JPA general budget. And Carl, you have an announcement to make, and I have a question.
Okay, sure. Yeah, my announcement is that I received today the signature pages signed by all council in the stipulation that we've talked loosely about that would authorize Sam to send out invoices pursuant to the 2017-2018 budget, and would direct the member agencies to pay those invoices. They could do so under protest if desired, but they would be making the payments within 30 days is what the stipulation states. And so since everyone has signed, it becomes effective as soon as
Here, make
the
it
person
so that the camera
signs.
can.
So I am now affixing my signature to the version of the stipulation that's on bond paper that I intend to present to the court on Friday.
Thank you. Good.
So this would allow us to invoice and we don't have to worry about adopting the actual budget.
Right,
And it was presented.
which we can't do because we don't have a quorum anyway.
Right.
Which was my question. Okay.
Yes.
Then we will move on to discuss and establish minimum staffing levels as required by the NPDES compliance evaluation. Oh, is the stipulation a public document?
It is, I suppose, yeah.
Okay.
It's going to be presented to the court. It will certainly,
Once
Let's-
it's signed by everyone, then
it's
we can
assigned by
post it.
everyone, yeah.
It has been signed. Please send a copy to the paper.
Once it's signed.
It's signed.
Oh, no, I thought it just had your signature on it.
No, I've got copies.
Oh,
of
you've
all
got
that.
the other signature,
I
yeah.
can,
Scan it,
I can scan it for you.
and then I will send it.
Please send it
I
to the
will,
paper.
yes,
Thank you.
I will do so. So, as you're aware on the discussion for our permit reissuance, there was a laundry list of things that the inspector noted that needed to be remedied before our permit would be considered by the regional board for reissuance. And one of those is establishing a minimum staffing level, and that goes down to the level of how many of each type of classification. So for example, I can't just say we'll always have 3 operators. We will have X number of operators of a grade 3 or higher, grade 2 or higher, they want it at that level. How many mechanics, at what level, they want it that specific. And since we don't have anything that has ever established that, we needed to do something. Most agencies have some general commentary about it. Our operations manual really doesn't address it at all. And obviously I was not comfortable with establishing that without the board authorizing it. And it also happened to fall right in line with the staffing analysis that the board had asked for as part of the strategic plan, so it sort of just rolled forward. But a little bit more in detail was the analysis that I performed based on the Northeast Guide for Estimating Staff at Publicly and Privately Owned Wastewater Treatment Plants, which sort of superseded the EPA's recommendation. They had something similar to this, but it was outdated based on current requirements for the Clean Water Act. So this was updated in 2008. It was approved by the EPA that yes, they felt this was a satisfactory document to be used in lieu of their outdated document. And so I plugged in all the numbers based on types of equipment, how much equipment, as directed in the process. And the analysis that was performed by the consultant, I specifically asked them to look at the work we're currently doing. So looking at the workload that staff has, what we are doing now, do we have enough staff? What I did for the analysis from the Northeast Guide is I looked at what we should be doing. And for things like preventive maintenance and things like that. And so there is a difference between what the consultants said we needed for adequate staffing and what the guide shows that we should be doing to really address the preventive maintenance and requirements that we have. And I also want to note that when I did the analysis using the guide, I assumed that we would continue to contract out those sort of specialized tasks that it really wouldn't make sense for an agency of our size and volume to hire. Most of those activities are too infrequent, they're very specialized, we would probably have difficulty recruiting for the positions, things like that. So I already assumed that that amount of work was already going to continue to be contracted out because Sam has had a history of doing so, and the staffing analysis showed that that's probably the best way to handle it. So the recommendation in the guide is based on the assumption that we're already contracting out much of that specialized work. So I'm happy to answer questions.
This is discussed and established, but we don't have a quorum. So Carl, I mean, it's unfortunate that Half Moon Bay is not present. Because this is a fairly critical issue. Can then those of us who are here, can we give a recommendation? But we can't do a board action.
You can't take any action, and before the action would be taken, you'd probably want to have, with the full board present, you'd probably want to have further discussion anyway. So I mean, since we're not at a meeting,
well, we are having a meeting without a quorum.
Right, and I would recommend that if there are questions that the members that are present have, the representatives that are here, could ask, that would help me clarify anything, so that when I bring it back, and hopefully at the next meeting we have a quorum, maybe I can address some of those issues or concerns sort of proactively, so we don't have to spend more time at the next meeting going over that. That's what I was hopeful of once I found out that we would not have a quorum.
that seems like the best use of the time.
Yeah, because I'm sure you all have questions already.
Well, one of the things that I have heard recommended is simply to adopt the past staffing levels.
Yes.
Is that is that something that would be, if we don't do an action, that way you can follow, because there's a time limit on this.
Yes. The next
And-
board meeting, which is on the 28th, that's the regular board meeting.
Which is
week.
next Monday.
That would be the absolute latest, otherwise we wouldn't have time to prepare the response to the state because we have a set number of days after
Right.
we received that letter to respond, and we can't be late. So Monday's the absolute latest. If we haven't established it, then I would have to report to the state, the Regional Water Board, that we were unable to establish a minimum staffing.
That would not be so good.
No, I would prefer to report that we established a minimum staffing. One of the concerns is, since this data is publicly available, and because in the past, the regional board, when they've come in and done the inspections for the permit renewal, is they have expressed concerns regarding various preventive maintenance, performing it and actually recording it, actually documenting it. And part of the problem is we just don't have the staff to do that. And they've expressed their concerns with that. And I think what we're seeing is after several iterations of that, them wanting us to sort of put it on paper, as opposed to in the past, we've said, well, we'll address it, and then they come back and we still haven't addressed it. My concern is the analyses are publicly available, and both of them reflect that there's a concern about having appropriate and sufficient staffing to meet our requirements. And I'm not sure how the regional board would look at that when we go and talk in, I believe, November, to talk about our permit reissuance. So if we establish it at our current level, and our current level is already identified as insufficient, I don't know if they will accept it. That's my concern. But I understand the member agencies' concerns, because obviously bodies have dollars, or contracting out has dollars. Anything more than what we're already doing has dollars associated with it. And I understand that, and I had asked the consultant to be sensitive to that in performing their analysis. And I think that their recommendation took that into consideration, that there's a balance in there.
When is this minimum staffing level expected to be enacted? Is it like the regulatory agencies will expect us to start a hiring and training program, or is this something that we can move into over, say, the next year or so? Because we're at, holy cow.
Yeah.
Here we are in almost September,
Right.
late August, and finally, the budget is
Somewhat
deemed
addressed.
approved.
Yeah. They have not given us a set time, but they have asked us for an implementation schedule about when we would be doing some of the
Okay.
things they are recommending. I think we can give them a reasonable answer, that we wouldn't be able to onboard new numbers of people all at once. Obviously, there's recruitment processes we would have to go through, but I think what I would like to do, and what I would highly recommend, is that whatever we establish of our minimum staffing, if it's more than what we currently have, that we have and submit to the state along with that our schedule for bringing whatever those positions on board, and potentially a stopgap measure for getting some of the work done between now and then, like maybe some additional contract hours, or finding a more efficient way of using the contractors we currently have to at least get through some of the issues that they've pointed out.
Okay. And the staffing issues really got started in about 2000.
In going back and looking at sort of the history of staffing here, there was a significant downturn in staffing in the early 2000s. I believe part of that was we mechanized, we implemented the SCADA system. We also did the plant upgrades and expansion. A lot more of the equipment was newer, and I think there was a general understanding that it would require less maintenance and care because it was replaced. The problem is if you don't continue to do preventive maintenance, it ages faster than if you keep it going. And I know at one point we were down to only one maintenance technician.
There was,
Kind of like the Golden Gate Bridge, you're saying?
Yeah, you're painting from one end to the
there
other.
was more to it than that.
Well,
No, hang on, I was here.
yes.
And there was more to it than that. And the good part of it, I think, was an attempt to demonstrate the ability to drive down the budget.
Mm.
And it was coupled with the member agencies picking up the responsibility for televising and cleaning. So, and we did, I recall Montero contracted out with SPS, we got to know them really well, they did fine work, but then we eventually decided, honestly, this is something that we should bring back to Sam and let Sam consolidate and do this jointly for all of us. But our staffing levels were far too drastically cut at the time, and in retrospect, there was very little justification for it. It was ill-advised. It's not something that we've been comfortable repeating, although given the financial downturn in 08 through 11 or 12, we were looking at some situations where we all just had to tighten the belt a little bit. So I don't think anybody's opposed to giving a good hard look at the recommendations, but I noticed just through skimming the document from last year, a few things have changed since then already, so we need to read it with a pretty sharp eye for the things that have changed. Like, for example, we're not still rotating the supervisor duties, right?
Right. We have a single supervisor, which has helped with some of the inefficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
One of the issues is in that same period of time since the early 2000s to now, there have been very significant changes in the requirements that the regional board has placed upon us for both the collection system and how we respond to spills, as well as the laboratory work. And that while there was a discussion back then about things were becoming more simplified, we should be able to take on the laboratory work by cross-training the operators, it's actually gotten more complicated. And the operators are not lab technicians. And so by eliminating the lab technicians, we have seen that we have not kept up with the changes in the industry because there really isn't anyone who has that focus, because the operators are focused on operations. And while they do the samples and they can do we were woefully behind in compliance on how we were doing the lab work. Now we've brought in a consultant who's helped us get our SOPs and stuff back into alignment, but we also know that the state is looking at new requirements for labs. And there's still some discussion at the state level as to whether or not they're going to provide a simplified version for small labs, or if small labs are going to have to meet the same requirements. And it's really hard to keep up with all of that when you're focusing on so many other things. And we only have 2 people here who are lab certified with a Lab Tech 1. Right. So, and they also have other duties, so it becomes very difficult to stay on top of all of those. And we found in many cases that things had sort of slid off the plate because staff were just trying to do the bare minimum of, prevent spills, clean up after spills, address those sort of core issues. And the state is starting to tell us with some of these commentary that they expect something more than that. And staff has been trying to figure out how to address those with the current staffing. And as you can see from the consultant's report, is there are some positions that just have too much on their plate to stay on top of those things. And we do not anticipate that the regulatory agencies are going to lighten the load at any point in the near future. And I am facing, potential staff burnout, as well as I have several staff members who have been here 25 plus years. All of that knowledge that is in there is what makes them so efficient and effective. A new person or a newer person coming in has a much steeper learning curve, which means it takes a little longer for them because they don't have all those history. They don't know, all those little things that they've found to work around. And should one or more of those key individuals decide to retire, it could leave a very large hole in SAM.
But the new hires would be hired at more than likely a lower wage.
More than likely at a starting wage, and more than likely they would be new to PEPRA. We have a history of sort of growing our own. It's very hard to compete with some of the agencies that pay considerably different over the hill. And so we have, and because of the response time, you know, being able to respond within 60 minutes makes it highly likely that we're going to hire somebody who lives here. And so because of that, we tend to hire them at the introductory level and then train them, and they grow into fully fledged operators, mechanics, collection system workers. And so the likelihood is they will be new in the public sector, and therefore in the new tier, the less expensive tier of PERS, and they will likely start at, you know, step 1. So yes, less costly from that perspective, but it takes time to cross-train them, and when you're cross-training someone, you are not as efficient and effective doing your work because you're stopping and explaining things,
Well,
so it slows down the process.
That's certainly true.
Yeah.
So we can't take an action. We've asked questions. Do we have any more questions?
Is there additional information you would like? Is there something that we can add to this?
I'm just gonna take some time to go through it, mark it
Okay.
up, give you some questions.
Do we have confidence that the pay rate, if the pay rate at step 1 will be sufficient to attract people?
I think so. I think we might have to do some outreach. I think just advertising it's probably not going to work, but I think doing some outreach with various entities, like maybe the adult education, and some of the other agencies, like the county, where maybe they're doing internships or those types of things, and trying to actually intentionally attract people into whatever the positions are, I think will be very helpful. And if that's part of our plan, obviously then that could take some additional time to recruit and cross-train. But I think in the long run, it benefits Sam and the coast side to take those steps. Excuse me.
Well, certainly Half Moon Bay's decision to stick with Sam instead of bringing in collection system assistance from East Palo Alto, Menlo Park area, was certainly a wise one, given the continuing and traffic problems. And
Yes.
so having local is of critical importance for these spills.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess,
Especially if it happens on the day school starts here,
Yeah,
like
the
today.
new schedule, yeah.
Yeah, this morning was not good. I have a couple comments actually. This MRG study, which is dated June 2016, I only got this and started going through it admittedly after a full day of regular work today, but things just started to leap out, and the first 2 sentences of the second paragraph in the executive summary, SAM is currently and has been leanly staffed and challenged to perform even its day-to-day tasks. That seems to be their start point, actually, rather than so much their conclusion. The second is, this past winter provided record-breaking amounts of rain, and SAM staff was barely able to respond to emergencies caused by system overloads. And I thought, well, maybe this is actually June 2017, but it's not. It's 2016, and so they're referring to the winter of 2015-16,
which was dry.
which was
I
dry.
believe that was a typo, and I mentioned it to the consultant. This actually was 2017.
How could-
It was this year.
Well,
So it's wrong on the front page.
It's wrong on the front page. We didn't ask them to start performing the analysis until, I think, March.
So this is a June 2017, this is when you received it, June 2017?
Yes, yes, and I had mentioned to her that there was a typographical error on that front page. It is a June 2017 analysis.
The second attachment was the 2016.
Yes.
right, and those 2 sentences right there Just perked my ears right up.
Yeah, if it's
And-
the 2016 date, that would make no
And the,
sense.
Yeah.
yes, and then it became apparent that they're very heavily leaning on this Humphrey Consulting report on the collection systems O&M assessment.
Yes,
And again, I wish I had more time to go through all these, and so what I started to do was to go to the section called evaluation on various parts of data management, equipment, staffing, etc. And the evaluation of staffing starts with current staffing levels are adequate to accomplish the current levels of service.
that's just for the collection system,
Uh,
the contract services. That's all that Doug Humphrey looked at, and based on the assessment that they did last year, that portion of it had already been assessed, so I asked MRG not to repeat that we already had an analysis that had been done, a very in-depth analysis. So rather than duplicating that work, that the analysis performed and presented by Doug Humphrey had already been presented and discussed with the board and the member agencies. And so to keep the cost of the staffing analysis down, I asked them to not go back and reevaluate that same performance. So the MRG reflected primarily on everything other than the contract services. And then took the analysis done by Doug Humphrey and just pulled it into their staffing analysis, assuming that all of the, that we were in agreement with what the Humphrey report showed, and we were.
You know,
And we've already implemented some of the recommendations from the Humphrey
Well,
report.
that brings my next question then. It seems as though this MRG report is very heavily dependent on the Humphrey report, which only covers part of the overall system.
Right, it was only looking at contract services. That was strictly the purpose of it. That's all he was looking at, was the contract collection services. And that's why MRG relied on it, was because I asked them not to duplicate that analysis, since it
Right,
had been so
so-
recently performed.
Right.
And so they did analysis to complement that for
Yes.
the rest of the operation.
That's correct.
I gotta say, if this is predicated on this notion that the amount of work it took to deal with the spills this year is representative, I put it to all of us that it had better not be representative going forward, because we intend to spend a lot of money to make sure that that pipeline doesn't suffer the same kind of failure going forward. I fully expect that this time next year, we did not spend that kind of staff time, overtime, and all that extra expense.
Right.
We should have been defending against that expense by spending that money, but our partners didn't let us. Now we're gonna get this done, and we should be cutting that personnel capacity requirement substantially. And so I would hope that any analysis looks more at the steady state than the recent critical emergency state, because that's something that we can rectify, and we will.
Well, and one of the things that is mentioned in the MRG report is the staffing recommendation that they have does not take into consideration standby and overtime. They merely referenced it as this is just an example of how, even if you were able to get everything done in a regular day, all it takes is a series of irregular events to produce a compound problem. But the analysis that they did and the recommendations they made were based on day-to-day activity, not standby, not overtime.
Including that kind of anecdote doesn't really help them make that case. We wouldn't be having this conversation if it was helpful. All right.
Well, it was the board's recommendation to bring in an outside consultant.
I'm
I didn't know.
not saying it's a bad thing to bring in the consultant. What I'm saying is that the consultant report, I mean, we're gonna have to go through and find the places where we have to use the grain of salt and say, that may be an interesting but not helpful comment, and if we're finding anything that provides a basis on something that is hopefully a one-shot. I mean, I take the point that when you've got a team that's strained, it doesn't have a lot of resilience and flex for the aberrations. But if you've got a team that's strained and you've got a system that's well maintained, the likelihood of having to deal with those aberrations is much reduced. And then you can talk about things like, okay, can we do this through staff augmentation, through arrangements with neighboring agencies to come in and help in emergencies and those kind of things. So I mean, there are techniques that we can use that are very different from, hey, we're constantly having to put out fires, to we may have the occasional fire, maybe a mutual aid agreement is the smarter way to go.
Well, and I will let you know that as requested by the board last year, we did reach out to nearby member agencies and ask them if they would be interested in a mutual aid relationship or agreement, and they were not. They felt that that was Sam's issue to resolve. Given a catastrophic emergency, that was one thing, but not sort of a general storm event or something like that, because the belief was they would be needing those resources themselves, that the likelihood is they would be affected by the same weather or situation that is affecting us, and they would not have the resources to provide. That was the response from pretty much all of the neighboring agencies. So we did
Sure.
attempt to go that direction first.
That's
And I'm
the
sorry.
kind of mutual aid. I mean, every emergency services organization all up and down the coast has some kind of mutual aid arrangement. Fire departments, police departments.
Mhm.
It's not unusual to say, look, if we have a catastrophic equipment failure,
Mhm.
we'd like to be able to call on you, and we'd like to be available if you need it too. And I know that in the past we've had relationships with Pacifica in
Mhm.
particular. It may well be that their perspective on how this agency is being run might want them to keep some distance, but if we're going to be run well, I think we're going to have to work on establishing emergency mutual aid relationships.
And I think it's the definition of emergencies.
Understandably, if that emergency is due to a weather event or an earthquake, they may not have any way to respond because they've got their own business to attend to. But if we have, for example, significant pipeline failure, and we have to take all of our operators out into the field to work on that, maybe we can get an operator here to keep an eye on the plant. I mean, there's just all sorts, I'm not saying that's what we have to do, I'm just saying that the notion that it's very easy to say, let's just staff up to cover every possible circumstance, until you take it to the ratepayer, and the ratepayer's like, what are you talking about? You don't need that most of the time. So this is where some of those mutual aid things come from. It's for the extreme situation, not for the steady state. And staffing should be generally about the steady state.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that we reached out to them about was, for example, we get into a situation where we're short an operator because of a series of events, and the local agencies that we reached out to weren't interested. Obviously, once again, there is a mutual aid agreement among Bay Area agencies in a catastrophic emergency that they would assist. But they view the response to these types of situations, like it just happens to, something happens and somebody's out on vacation and somebody's out sick, as being something that's not an emergency. It's something that we, in their minds, should be able to address, and I believe the state also feels that way. So this was trying to take that into consideration, and we've seen that happen. I've been here for a little over a year and a half, and we've seen it happen several times where we depend on our staff, and we get so tight that it just takes one incident, and it's not even an unusual incident, not anywhere near what we had this year, and we fall behind. And one of the things that the report points out is you can't get those hours back. You know, if somebody's out, then that work just falls off.
I'd say that's what I'm talking about in terms of steady state. I mean, there's a perfect staffing level, and then it's disappointing to hear that we haven't been able to establish anything yet that would allow us to have some chance of being able to say, could we have some staff augmentation help? But that's the kind of thing that I think, I wouldn't be giving up on the first try. I think the notion that each of us may have situations where we could use a little flexibility in our staffing because there was a terrible accident or something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are very real things, and the notion that an agency might be put in a jam because things were tight, but then they got like over tight. I think over time we should be working on trying to get those relationships established, and I wouldn't take the first no as the final no.
Well, and part of the discussion with the consultant was having capacity, staff time capacity to build those relationships, because that takes time away from other tasks when you're doing that. And one of those things is just going to all of the like CWEA and CASA and BACWA and all of those Bay Area types of organizations. And that's where you start building those relationships. Yeah. That's where you can start building the bridges for that. And that's one of the things that staff had expressed to me. It's one of the things that I've observed. It's one of the things I've experienced, is trying to get away from here to go do those kinds of things when there is such a workload that is already on the position. And I think that's what the MRG report clearly states, that it's imperative that SAM plan, that SAM be strategic, that SAM build those relationships, but how do you build that in when you're just trying to get the tasks done? And I agree that there's somewhere in there is the proper staffing level, and I just think we're below it right now. I've been saying that for some time. That came up in part of the strategic plan, and that was one of the reasons why we were asked to have a third party do the analysis, so that there wasn't any perception of bias, or that we've got some skin in the game to the result, and that's why we went out and had a consultant review this. And I think that all of the information that has been gathered and I've been able to put together and that we've talked about over the last year and a half has indicated that staff just has too much on the day-to-day.
Good. Do we have any more questions? Matthew?
I have some more comments. I would like to echo what Director Boyd said about don't take the first no as the ultimate no. Well, to paraphrase the eminent Senator Dirksen, an FTE here and an FTE there, but soon you're talking about real money. And I would also note that the Regional Water Board report from July of this year, finding number 2, per findings in the previous inspection report, the discharger should continue to review and evaluate staffing needs and update its O&M manual to describe the facility staffing requirements. Well, that's what we're doing. I have a lot of experience in reading bureaucraties and other venues and trying to interpret what it actually means. And this is why it's just a typical one where it could mean, yeah, review and evaluate your staffing needs, i.e. you need more folks, or maybe not. Maybe it doesn't mean that. So, but I will say that I know our staff, and I'm pretty sure the majority of our board would really like to see the current staffing levels maintained, unless there's a lot more reasons.
Maintained as opposed to increased.
As opposed to increased, unless there are a lot more really determinative and driving reasons that we're presented with to recruit more people.
Okay, any more comments, Scott?
No, I'll go through the document and I'll try to get you some questions.
I think we should send out a note to Half Moon Bay recommending before next Monday that they watch this segment of the video so that they are fully up to speed. This has been a good discussion. Moving on to new business, discuss invoicing of member agency assessments for fiscal year 17-18. I think with the stipulated agreement that's addressed. Am I correct, Carl?
Yes.
So that's done.
Yeah, we actually had, in hopes that we would have everyone here with this in mind, that we would be able to move forward with the stipulated agreement. I actually had all the invoices ready to be handed out. So I will go ahead and have staff mail them out. We both email them and hard copy email,
And
hard copy them tomorrow.
The 30 days starts today?
It'll,
or tomorrow?
tomorrow when we email it to them.
Tomorrow, okay.
Yeah.
So please put a due date
Yes,
on it, and please keep the board informed.
yes.
If anybody is late, just as a point of information, I think that's very useful. Moving on to B, discuss retention of special counsel, either one, to advise Sam regarding proposed general counsel contract amendment and provide direction to staff, or two, to represent Sam in the pending litigation with regard to the regional board investigation. And since this is only a discuss, that's good. I should probably be on next week's agenda, but let's discuss it so that Half Moon Bay can watch it and know what we're talking about, so it can be a quick item.
Yeah, the first part of this was on the agenda last week, we didn't get to it. That would have been to retain special counsel to advise Sam regarding the modification of my contract amendment. As I pointed out before I left the room, it might be helpful at some point during that discussion to have had counsel in the room. That's simply what this is about. The second alternative is provides an opportunity to me to talk about this, because it involves hiring outside counsel, not my firm, another firm, to either be involved with the litigation or involved with the what now is an administrative action, existing litigation, and or both, so that I would have an opportunity to explain to the board what Sam needs with regard to that, at least some rough ideas, put some parameters on it, because I don't see how Sam can be without counsel in either of those settings. That's just not really acceptable. That's not the way things usually work.
Right.
So that's what this was. That's why this is on the agenda. So, because if we were talking about my contract, I'd be back out in the hall anyway again, because although you couldn't take any action, it still wouldn't be appropriate for me to be in the room.
And Carl and I talked about this because how can we give proper advice to the board on how best to address the concerns that have been expressed by Half Moon Bay if counsel's not in the room?
Right.
And if he has to step out when this conversation comes up about how it's best for Sam to be represented in these issues, obviously I'm not an attorney and I wouldn't feel comfortable advising the board on that. So how, it's the chicken or egg. How do we get this? So this was a way to potentially get around that and actually be able to have a discussion without Carl feeling like he's in the room and there's a conflict of interest. So this was
Right.
sort of the best solution we could come up with.
Right,
This
and
go on.
No, I was just going to say that there wouldn't be any action. Obviously, no action could be taken tonight. I don't know. I mean, we didn't specifically address it to provide direction, but that would be part of the discussion, obviously, potentially when it comes up, and who knows what would happen if we had the full quorum here. But it certainly seemed to me to be worthwhile to at least have somebody who is a lawyer explaining to the board the need for involvement of counsel on Sam's behalf in the proceedings that are going on. So that's the whole purpose of that. And, we could go through that now, but I suspect we'd have to go through it again anyway.
Do we have any comment?
Comments or questions?
A question, with regard to the regional board investigation, we've gotten there, the bottom line, as it were. How much more investigation or use of lawyers will be involved at this point?
Right now, all they've done is tell us what they are proposing the administrative civil liability is for the single spill. They have also looked at all of the spills for the past, or as we call them SSOs, for the past 3 years of all member agencies. They still have to issue a report on that inspection. And just the initial list of items for just the Portola pump station alone, which doesn't include Montera or Princeton, nor does it include the member agencies. So we will be getting a report probably at the end of October, and it's likely to have lots of recommendations on it.
So I just don't see Half Moon Bay agreeing to pay anything for lawyers at all, based on what we've seen the past couple of meetings. Whether it's in-house or special counsel, I don't see that happening. And what I'll note, and I think we need to contend with, Director Slater-Carter brought this up at the last meeting, so we've already expended quite a bit this year on unanticipated expenses based on the actions of Half Moon Bay bringing their action, plus the unfortunate need to spend time dealing with the spills and the regional board based on those spills. So we have expended more of our legal budget than we anticipated, and in order to be able to fund our work and our needs for the duration of the contract, then it's, even if we were not to spend another penny above the budgeted anticipated amount, we still have quite a hole.
Well, and remember, we've gone, because of the limit on time during a SAM board meeting, we have gone to 2 meetings a month, which doubles
So
staff.
we've got
staff
expenditures already that we're already on the hook for, that have tapped our resources, and for us to be able to function as an agency, we need to raise the cap on that. There are things that could lessen some of the anticipated need, but it's really not our decision whether or not to withdraw the lawsuit. So barring that, we're going to need it. Half Moon Bay has made it very clear they want to do everything they can to stop us from spending more on that. I think for us the conundrum is, all right, what's the way forward? The money's already spent that's already spent.
Right.
You know, we didn't get a stipulated agreement executed by all parties without having Carl having to spend quite a bit of time, and I want to give Carl some kudos for bringing this forward and driving this effort to get us to where we are. This is quite an accomplishment. It doesn't come for free, and we expect to pay for that kind of work, and we'll be paying for that work, but that taps our budgeted amount. And so we're going to have to find a way to bring that number up.
I'm not clear on whether that's a position in favor of hiring outside counsel.
I think it's orthogonal to it. I don't think it's money's got to come from somewhere. With Carl, we have a negotiated rate. We don't have to put out a bid. We don't have to spend staff time to get more money, and somebody's got to pay the money for counsel. If that counsel is dealing with the lawsuit, Half Moon Bay has made it very clear they plan to do everything they can to stop us from spending SAM money on that. So,
Which,
Our GCSD counsel has explained to us more than once, using words like horrendous, the amount of discovery and that effort that will be involved in this litigation.
exactly.
And it seems to me that if there were, and maybe I hope Carl will weigh in on this, if there were any savings to be seen, the 3 agencies could task Sam's lawyer for much of that discovery, rather than 3 agencies sending their own lawyers in here and Sam hiring another firm to do 4 episodes of discovery. So I don't know if that's true. But
no, that makes some sense. I guess I keep thinking about special counsel as being a distinction without a difference, because it's not like Carl's been conflicted out on any basis. It's that Half Moon Bay doesn't want to pay for anything that works to defend against the lawsuit, and they've been unwilling to acknowledge that there are expenses that we need to incur to provide the board and our general manager with good counsel as we go through this, even if it's just about the discovery, even if it's a fully neutral role.
So Half Moon Bay is going to be against either 1 or 2.
Exactly.
I can't see them supporting anything that
Right.
in any way might provide any support for SAM to defend itself against the lawsuit that they brought. So I know that it's such an obvious conflict, perhaps the judge can straighten this out. But I'm hoping that we can see them kind of, at some point, see the obvious conflict and take action on their own and avoid making the case any more complicated than it needs to be.
Well, the problem is, as I see it, that we're going to have to come back to board for an adjustment in the budget, because as your attorney said, and as we all know, being grown-ups, that litigation is expensive. It's very, very, very expensive, and it's going to be expensive in terms of staff time here.
Oh, indeed.
And in terms of just getting the documents out of where they're stored, because these haven't been digitized. And my guess is one or another of the parties involved is going to want to see the original document to make sure there hasn't been some shenanigans with editing, online editing or whatever. They're rightfully suspicious. And that's going to be very expensive. And this is just the beginning of that discussion of, even if Sam were not in the lawsuit, even if it were dismissed as a party of a real party in interest, there would still be the research and the requests from the agencies. And it's going to be expensive. Now, one of the things the board might want to discuss is charging back the agencies on a time spent basis, kind of like the collection system. We could start a new accounting, the lawsuit system.
So if
But
someone,
everybody'd have to agree to it.
so if someone brings a burden on the agency, they get to carry the weight of that burden?
Yeah.
That doesn't really sound like much of a partnership. I'd hate to see it go to that, but I can certainly understand that if one agency brings $50,000 worth of fees and impact to the agency, it sounds weird, but I mean, I see where you're going. I mean, it makes a certain sense, and yet at the end of the day, it's like, it's a shame if it comes to that.
Well, it is, but if we were all going to agree that we could increase the SAM budget for legal defense by the contract by the $100,000 for SAM to be able to defend itself, and the administrative services that were needed by $50,000 or something, that would be one thing. But Half Moon Bay has voted, I believe, 4 times not to increase the contract with Carl's firm. And I don't see that they're going to change their opinion.
No, I don't.
Yeah, and it
No
has,
one does.
and it
I
has
would
nothing.
be, I would be happy if I were wrong. I would be thrilled to death if it comes up and they say, oh, of course.
Yes.
There are times where I am so thrilled to be wrong. And maybe with this stipulation, maybe they will see the wisdom in getting along and being partners. But if I were to project from past behavior, I would not see that as a likelihood. So I don't know. I hope I'm wrong. I hope next week, Half Moon
Well,
Bay approves
so-
this.
Good discussion, but we're not gonna solve this tonight, right?
We're not going to solve it. It will be back.
I
Next
will, I'll bring this back as part of the regular meeting, and I know one of the, Director Penrose had asked what's been spent so far. So, I will try to, update my staff report with regards to the contract to delineate how much of it is because of the additional meetings, how much of it is because of the lawsuit, how much of it is because of the spills and
If I
the water
might
board.
suggest, might consider reframing the item as agendized into something about dealing with the increased expenditures this year,
Mm-hmm.
and move it off of the specific items, and then let your accounting of where it's been spent speak to that, so we can talk about the budget need and perhaps avoid the head-to-head on, does Sam do anything to defend when it's only a real party in interest? And if we can
Right.
stick to, but I think to your comment, we should put in there, there's gonna be discovery, and our agency needs good counsel during that discovery to make sure that job is done well. And that's not about defending, that's about making sure the record is accurate. And I think everybody's interests are served if that record is accurate.
By the way, where is all that stuff stored?
Iron Mountain. It's offsite storage. We had stored it here for a number of years, but between pest infestation, access, moisture, all sorts of things, there was a real concern that some of those critical documents may not be in good states when needed. And so we pay for offsite storage. Because we just don't have anywhere here where we could do that.
It's,
And Iron Mountain's the firm name.
Yes,
Where is the actual
I'm
location?
not sure where the actual location is, but it costs, beyond our just regular storage costs, it costs to ship it to them, for them to come and pick it up and take it, and also to recall it.
I'm
Yeah.
sure.
If I'm thinking
Coming
of the
and
same place that another client uses, they're in Fremont or somewhere.
That
around
sounds
there.
about right, yeah.
I'm not sure if it's the same, I don't.
I don't know,
pay
they
a lot
have,
of attention to
they have
what-
numerous locations, and I just don't know off the top of my head where ours is, but I do know that there is a charge per request, and it depends on the amount of boxes that are recalled or picked up and transmitted, and then they charge based on the volume of what they're holding for us. So obviously, digitized is great because it's easy for us to search for it, but it's also important, I think, in a particular case like this, I agree that lawyers tend to want to see the original if you have them. So one way or the other, we will be recalling boxes.
I would suggest that
Okay.
when we have them, making a good copy would be appropriate,
Mm-hmm.
just saying.
Scanned online.
I will say, I remember way back when, in the day when computers were being discussed and new, and they said there was going to be an end to paperwork, and look, we're paying to store papers.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is true. And one of the things is, depending on the volume of requests that we get, it may be a point where we just identify those and then send them out to be professionally scanned. It just may be more efficient that way. It'll just depend on what types of documents and the volume of it.
That may be a good idea, because I think that the request is going to be very short. Send it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that very well may be, and it may be
Can't
we
be
just,
that short, they're gonna be paid by the hour, so it's
Yeah.
gonna have to be a very lengthy thing, which boils down to send it all.
yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
if you expecting the way that these kind of things normally
Yeah.
are stuffed into boxes and then sent off to be stored, you can't just give topics or dates or anything.
Yeah.
It's
We have to
all-
recall 8 boxes and look through them for those specific things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's my guess, and at some point, some large area of this building will be boxes stored with a lot of sticky tabs on them.
Yes,
I've been
yes.
through this before, but yes, there will be costs associated with that, not even the legal costs, but just the sheer manpower, and I would imagine that we might have to either get some additional assistance, like somebody manning the phone so that staff can handle those documents, or a professional scanning situation.
Right.
So,
Okay.
and I'll bring those forward once I start having an idea.
And even though this is a special meeting, because we had to adjourn the last meeting, the regular meeting, we never got to the reports, and so it seemed appropriate to put the reports that we didn't get to from the last meeting on this meeting, so we will start with the general manager's report.
Well, we don't have the monthly report, that's gonna be on the next meeting, but I was going to give an update on the discussion with the state, which thankfully I can report that, we shouldn't have a lot more visitation, at least on the spill itself. There might be more discussions regarding just the general collection system issues. But, like I said before, thankfully, the lesser amount in the calculation was acceptable by the regional board, so that is
And-
great.
Can we put that number on air, Carl? Is that a public number?
I think we have an official public record that came about from the regional board. I've looked at it on my phone, that's as far
Okay,
as I've gotten with it, so I can't say much about it.
500,000.
Well, it's 344,000 gallons, $522,700. And then, of course, they go into a great detail of how they got to that number. But that is what they are recognizing as the spill volume over a period of 4 days and what the administrative liability penalty is for that spill.
But for the record, that's a single spill, and they're going to be looking at,
They are looking at all the SSOs that have occurred within SAM's jurisdiction, including the member agencies, because we contract to provide the collection services. So they are looking at and have requested 3 years' worth of documentation. So I do not anticipate that we are done with that conversation.
and the individual agencies are responsible for their own fines for the spills in their agencies. SAM is not responsible for those, correct?
I will defer to legal counsel based on language that's in the agreements, but the way the regional board looks at it is SAM is the ultimate holder of the permit, which allows everyone to collect and treat and discharge wastewater, but each member agency has its own sanitary sewer management plan, and they're responsible for their actions under each of those plans.
And that is an SSMP.
Yes, all those
For-
wonderful acronyms. And so I would envision that there will be a discussion about if there are any issues with the member agency, who will also be talking to SAM as their contractor. So I believe that's a multi-stage discussion.
Okay. Okay, attorney's reports.
I don't have much to say. I will just augment what Beverly said real briefly, and that the calculation that the regional board apparently accepted is the one that involved looking at the different meters, which is the one that Director Warren said, well, why don't you just do that? Well, that's what we did, except for the meter that wasn't functioning. So that's the number, at least as of this point, that we're talking about.
And the meter that was, to be clear, the meter that was not functioning is a Half Moon Bay meter and not a SAM meter.
That is correct, it is
And
not ours.
just to be clear, it's not only not ours, but it's not part of what our system is dependent on. Nobody ever made any promises that it would be kept in working order, so that was there for them. They installed it at a time when they wanted to keep an eye on things because they weren't sure about what was happening here. So the fact that it wasn't working shouldn't be construed as anything. It simply wasn't available to help us corroborate the number.
Yeah.
It would have been nice, but nobody actually did anything.
Right.
Let me ask, earlier it was mentioned that there would need to be council input ongoing with the regional board. What does that come to? They're going to go to into the past and find all the SSOs, and they're going to go to the 3 districts and see what the records show, and they're going to do a report and whatever they do at the end of that report. And what's council's role in? You check the regional board's numbers? Do you respond to them in some formal manner?
We might provide advice as to the arguments or the analysis, whether it's in compliance. Certainly, if the matter goes to hearing, you'd probably want to have counsel present. Not legally required, I suppose, but you'd probably want to. I mean, one of the things that, for example, that's in this correspondence from the regional board is a hearing date in November. There's ways to avoid the hearing, one of which is the alternative environmental programs approach, which you could reach a stipulation and agree to the number that they've proposed and work on putting some of that money someplace else. But if you go to hearing, you probably want to have a lawyer. And if there's a back and forth in negotiation, it might be helpful to have a lawyer as well. I wouldn't expect to be doing calculations. I would expect to look at a letter and say that there's something there that can you make this more clear? I don't understand this. If I don't understand it, I can't explain it. That sort of thing. But there's no point in me doing numbers unless something just looks funny and I can't reconcile it, and I'd ask. I do that. That's sort of what I do, but not in any context.
And I'm not familiar with the expenditure numbers, but is this something that we need to up the legal budget for at
Yes,
this point.
yes.
And that was part of the recommendation in the staff report was, it was sort of multifold. One was just the sheer increase in number of meetings that we were having, but also the fact that we had a series of events occur that back when we had adopted the contract language, we didn't anticipate. So we just anticipated that Carl would be here one day a month, and then some general counsel throughout the month based on whatever we needed. That's all, blown out of the water
Yeah.
over the last 8-9 months.
Yeah, and it's been accelerated the last couple of months while we're trying to sort out the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a lot of meetings and a lot of back and forth.
Directors' reports, do we have anything? No. Topics for future board consideration, I think we have all the agendas, items we've been putting off while we've been talking about budget and attorney's fees. That list is growing, unfortunately.
And it's just going to later and later meetings.
I would ask everyone to, in particular, look at the staffing levels and the documents we've got and get any questions you have to Beverly so that we can make it a more efficient meeting.
If you have questions, it'd be easier for me if I can get the answers in advance and be prepared.
Because next week is the last chance we will have to discuss that, and there are consequences for not doing it right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Do we have a vote? Yay, unanimous. Good night, see you next week.